On this episode of Still Loading, Mario gets mega-sized. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and it is the kickoff of Mario Month 2023. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so very much for tuning in. I don't. Do you tune into podcasts? I guess not. You click download, but whatever. We're going with old timey shit here. Welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. Today, like I said before, we're kicking off Mario Month, Mario Month 2023, and to kick it off, we are talking about new Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo DS. And joining me today, returning guest from the Final Fantasy VIII episode just a brief month and a half ago or about there, Tri from My Life in Gaming. Tri, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing pretty good. Glad to be here.
Thank you for agreeing to come back on. New Super Mario Bros. I mean, this was a big deal back in 2006, so I'm very excited to talk to you about this game. And there's so much. There's like simultaneously a lot to talk about because I feel like the build up to this game is almost more interesting than the game itself. And I'm not trying to throw shade at the game, but I feel like all the circumstances revolving around this game leading up to its release and development are almost more interesting than what the game ended up being. What are your thoughts on it, though?
I mean, absolutely. I agree. And really the the release of this game was like kind of personal for me in like a weird way. Because I know that you look at this game today and think really the whole new Super Mario Brothers series kind of just retroactively like cannibalized itself by being too much of the same thing again and again. And when you look back at the early Mario games, with the exception of Super Mario Brothers 2 The Lost Levels, the quote unquote real Super Mario Brothers 2,
Yeah.
which had like basically the same graphic style. You've got Super Mario Brothers to, what we knew is Super Mario Brothers 2 to Super Mario Brothers 3 to Super Mario World. All of those games had a radically different art style and identity. And the new Super Mario Brothers series very much kind of came up with this safe and sterile version of the Mario world that was representing it on its most basic level. And it doesn't really want to deviate from that. Whereas I feel like the 3D games have continued to be visually and aesthetically inventive. The new 2D series has played it very safe with its aesthetics, and that has made them kind of all blend together and mush together. But at the time this game released, that aesthetic was not necessarily driven into the ground. And furthermore, it was the first time since, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Super Mario World, what we call it, I guess it was 1990 in Japan and 91 in the US, I believe. So it had been a decade and a half since a true Super Mario Brothers game. I mean, you've got Yoshi's Island, but that
was more of a Yoshi game than a Mario game.
Yeah, it doesn't really play like a Super Mario game, and it wasn't even branded Super Mario World 2 in Japan.
Real quick, it actually was the first 2D Mario game since 1992's Super Mario Land 2 Six Golden Coins.
Oh,
That
yeah,
was
yeah,
the last
yeah, in my
2D
head,
one,
like,
but it was the first
yeah.
console one, like you said, since Super Mario World.
Well, I
Or
guess
sorry, it wasn't even
it
console.
wasn't a
This was on
it wasn't a
handheld as well.
console, no. But it was still it was more in the style of the console games, though. It wasn't, because I
Yes.
always kinda considered the Game Boy games, I love the Game Boy ones. I love Super Mario Land, I love Super Mario Land 2,
Hmm.
but I've never really considered them part of the same canon, if that makes sense. Like, they're different.
They have
They
a
look
very
different,
different feel to them.
they feel very different, and they feel different from each other as well. Whereas this is clearly, to me, uh, an extension of Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario World, and really, I should say Super Mario Brothers, because that's probably the one that it skews the closest to in terms of how it plays, in my opinion.
And that was actually very intentional by the dev team. One of the reasons they went back to it, and we're going to go into a little bit, we're going to talk about our own personal histories with the game. But real quick before we do that, in doing research for this, one of the things that the dev team really focused on was that they wanted to keep it simplistic, because a lot of the feedback that they got when Mario switched from 2D to 3D was that it alienated a lot of gamers who maybe we're a little bit older. I'm not even saying that to sound ageist, but like kids are able to, absorb that stuff like a sponge. Like 3D gaming did
Mhm.
alienate a lot of people for a long amount of time until, more
Absolutely.
generations got used to it. And now a lot more people are used to 3D gaming. But, um, yeah, like Mario 64 and Mario Sunshine cut out. I mean, if you look at the sales numbers alone of 2D versus 3D Mario games, it was significant, the drop off between like Mario sales figures. Let me look it up real quick. Uh Super Mario game sales numbers. Um it it is like it is pretty there's a pretty steep drop off. I'm trying to see if I can find it right here. But so if you look at like the top handful, that the top four selling Super Mario Brothers games, right? In terms of sales numbers, the original Super Mario Bros. That's not surprising because that was packaged with the NES. That's almost
Yeah, and I
like,
don't know if that counts also the bazillion times it's been re-released.
well, this is considered just the NES one.
Okay.
Because then there's Super Mario Bros. DX, which was for the Game Boy Color. Uh, which hold on, this doesn't make any sense. Hold on a second. Oh no, I'm sorry. Now I see why I'm so lost with this. So it's they're adding all of the sales to all the different versions together. So this is on the VG sales wiki for Mario. If you add in all the different versions of Super Mario Bros, Super Mario Bros, Super Mario Bros DX, excuse me, the NES Classic Series for the GBA, and then the Wii Virtual Console, it has like 48 million sales, and that's like the number one. Um, I still don't think these numbers are accurate. I'm going to try to find something else, but it maybe this will actually be what I'm looking for here. But if you look at the top selling like regular Mario Brothers games, like Odyssey is the closest 3D Mario to actually be like super successful. Up until then, like the 2D games had just destroyed almost everything. And this was the first time they were coming back to it. They were trying to really reclaim that sense of nostalgia a little bit. They were trying to
Right.
weaponize nostalgia, but not necessarily in a cynical way. Like they weren't trying to be like, "Hey, do you remember? Here's an HD
Well,
remaster of Super Mario Bros." It was a
in a lot of
completely new
ways,
game, but in an old style.
nostalgia was kind of exploiting nostalgia was a little bit new in video games.
Yeah.
It was not it was not established as it is today, where there's a million pixel art indie games, and Sega re-releases all of its games for 2 cents each. It was it was there was a time, handhelds luckily helped us sort of not entirely get into this situation. But I remember when the DS first came out, I was very nervous that that was the death knell of 2D gaming,
Hmm.
because we had the Game Boy for so long into the early 3D years, and then we had the Game Boy Advance into like the GameCube, PS2, Xbox years. And when I saw that the DS was unveiled and it 3D games were very much a focus even early on, like with Super Mario 64 DS and stuff, I thought, oh no, this is it. Like 2D games are going to die. And luckily that didn't happen. And the DS actually turned out to be, a very good balance of 2D gaming and 3D
Hmm.
gaming. Um, and now, 2D is way stronger now in gaming than it was at this time because 2D was pretty dead on consoles for the most part.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
but so you know, this was a good time. I think people were ready and hungry for some, true throwback 2D action. And I mean, it was just amazing to me that something like this was happening at all. We can be cynical about the what the new Super Mario Brothers series became and how it's sort of driven into the ground. But at the time, I was it was like I said. I mean, I'll explain a little bit more later, but it was kind of almost emotional for me that this actually happened after so many years.
And it's funny. So let's segue into our personal experiences with this, since you were just talking about like you were emotional seeing this return to 2D Mario, and you're 100% on the mark with it. Like 2D games were pretty much destined to be only handheld things, and you like it like you said, it felt like they were going the way of the dodo, and which is a shame, and I'm very happy that they didn't, thank God. But it I can totally see why this would make you emotional, just feeling like, oh, they're bringing it back to the style that I fell in love, that I first found the series with. And that was, like I said, it was super intentional. That's also why the power-ups in this game, and we're going to dive into the power-ups in a little bit more detail. Hey everyone, Josh here. We totally forgot to dive into one of the newest power-ups in this game, and that is the blue turtle shell, in which Mario can dive in and kind of bounce side to side when he like slides in it. Pretty cool power-up, but I realized after we recorded this, we never really brought it up. So I wanted to at least make sure to include it here to indicate, yes, we forgot it in the episode, but I did not forget here. So blue shell power-up is a new addition to this game. They The power-ups in this game are very simplistic. There's only really like a handful of power-ups in the game. The two most basic ones are your basic original Super Mario Bros. One, the power-up mushroom and the fire flower. Or the
Yep.
super mushroom, excuse me, and the fire flower, and of course your one-ups. And there was other stuff they added to this game, but the ones that you see the most often in this game are the ones you saw in the first Super Mario Brothers game.
Yep.
But yeah, so let's dive into personal attachment. I'm actually going to start off because mine is relatively short, and um, I I don't know. I came at this game with a very different perspective when I first played it. So when this game came out, I did not own a DS, so I could not really play it. I was also still in high school. Yeah, I would have been a junior in high school when this came out, like in between my junior and senior year. Uh, and I didn't have a DS. I didn't own pretty much any handheld consoles. And Mario at the time, this is going to sound so weird because now I love Mario games. Like I look forward to playing Mario games. But at the time, I did not give two shits about Mario. Which
Mm.
is so weird to say now, but like up at that time, I had never even beaten a Mario game because I didn't have an NES growing up. I'm old enough that I could have had a Super Nintendo, but didn't have a Super Nintendo. Got an N64 as my first console, but I never got Mario 64. I was one of the only kids in the world who probably had an N64 but did not have Super Mario 64. Didn't get a GameCube. And so when this game was coming out, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I just didn't care. I had no interest in it. My earliest memories with this game is that after high school, I got a job at this local deli, and this friend of mine named Joe, he worked there too, and I can talk about this now because that deli is, neither of us work there anymore, and it since has unfortunately gone out of business. But we we would, in between customer orders, we would just play on the DS, either the Age of Empires, like turn-based game that they
Mm.
had on the DS. It was like Age of Kings or something like. It wasn't Age of Kings. That's the second. I forget what it was called, but there was an Age of Empires game for the DS, and we would play that. But we would actually play the mini games in between customers on this game. So I didn't really play this original game a lot. I actually played the mini games a ton, and it was either the mini games on this or on the Super Mario 64 DS one, which are they're basically the same. There's a handful of different.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually remember, it's kind of funny to think about because I do, a lot of video comparisons today. And obviously I didn't have the equipment to do any particularly great comparisons, but the Nintendo DS Lite came out around, gosh, I don't think it was the same day, but I feel like it maybe came out like maybe a week after New Super Mario Brothers.
I will look it up for you right now while you
It was
keep talking. I'll
all
look it up.
it was all in the same rate time range. And I remember sharing with some of my online buddies because I had a DS and a DS Lite, and I had Mario 64 DS and New Super Mario Brothers. I was actually able to use those mini games to make like side by side comparisons of like what the screen on the DS looks like versus the screen on the DS Lite, because
Okay.
I was able to have the same screen on both at the same time.
You are right. This came out around the same time. In the DS Lite came out in March of 2006 in Japan and in June of 2006 in North America. New Super Mario Brothers for the DS came out in North America first, believe it or not, on May 15th in 2006, and in Japan on May 25th,
Yeah.
2006.
I remembered those coming out very close together. And but yeah, that's funny. I forget if you were finished telling your story there.
Oh, so what ended up happening was we would play that, and then I didn't touch the game for literal years. I would say maybe I first beat this game maybe 3-4 years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but the first time I actually played it all the way through was only 3 or 4 years ago, because I remember it was I specifically made it a New Year's resolution, my New Year's gaming resolution, to play my DS more, because I barely ever touched the system. So that year I specifically was like, all right, I'm going to beat some of these games that I've just never beaten before. So I played all the way through this. I actually played through, I think I want to say Elite Beat Agents for the first time as well.
Oh, okay.
Tried a bunch of other DS games. I think I played the first Phoenix Wright game that year too.
Yes.
And I was just going through everything, and I did end up enjoying this. I'll go into more of my thoughts about the game a little bit later on, but that's my own personal experience where the story of me leading up to actually playing the game is more interesting than what was going on in my life when I was playing the game. Because normally you tie the nostalgia of a game, you tie it with stuff that's going on in your life around the time that you play something. I have more nostalgia for the lead up to this game than the actual playing of this game. But what about you, Tri? What is your personal experiences, or what is your personal experience with this game?
So for me, I actually had just like literally just graduated college. I mean, would have been May 2006. I remember my parents lived briefly in Michigan at the time, so went from North Carolina back up to their place in Michigan, and got the game uh, once I was up there. And but really, this the timing of when it came out was so interesting for me personally. And I was actually working on a video uh, in late 2002 um, that I unfortunately had to put on the back burner. And hopefully that video I'm intending to have time, hopefully
Wait, do you
around the
mean
time
late
that
2022?
2022. What did I say? Did I say 2002?
Yeah, I was like, holy crap, Try. This is a
No,
slow burn of a video.
my mind is on early 2000s right now. No, but I'm hoping I'm going to have time to finish this video that I started late last year. I'm hoping to release it either before or after the Super Mario Brothers movie comes out.
Mm.
If I doubt by the time by when this episode comes out, of the podcast, I probably won't have released that video. So you're going to be getting maybe a little bit of a teaser, a preview of what I want to do with that video, because at the my last project, I spent most of my time uh, for classwork anyway, my final semester in college, working on a trailer
Mm.
of a 3D Mario animation that I was making.
Oh, okay.
And this was something that I had wanted to do since my freshman year. And I was initially inspired by. Have you ever seen this website? There's a it's still around and still looks like it did in 2002. Called themushroomkingdom.net. Is
Okay.
this old Mario fan site, and they had lots of resources and news and information and stuff. But then I think it was early 2003, which would have been my start of my second semester in college. They made a fan film section, and I was like, I want to make a Mario fan film, because I was, me and my high school friends, made stupid videos all the time, and
Mhm,
that's
mhm.
ultimately how, what led to me being a videographer today, right? And I was like, I want to make a Mario fan film, but I feel like a real Mario film should be animated. Like, it shouldn't be live action. Like, I'm actually kind of an apologist for the Bob Hoskins movie. I kind of like it. But I was like, a Mario movie should be animated, and I was like, but how? Like, and so like I started like brewing up all these ideas in my head, and over the years I kind of developed like what I wanted to do with it and how I thought I was going to make it. At some points I thought I could make it in After Effects. At some points I thought I could make it in Flash, but ultimately I did learn this weird. It was actually taught in a class in my school. This sort of obscure animation software, 3D animation modeling and software called Animation Master.
Okay.
And one of the options I had for my final project was to make a 3D animation. So what I had I realized eventually, like, okay, there is no way I'm ever actually going to take the time or be able to take the time to justify making this like big epic Mario movie I want to make. So I will just like make peace with the fact that I'm I'm just going to make a trailer out of it for this project. I'm going to take all my ideas and like cram them into a trailer
Okay.
for this movie. And all of my most of my ideas revolved around things that I I wanted to see in Mario again, but didn't exist really anymore. So, like for
Mhm.
example, like Mario 64 is a high contender for my favorite video game of all time. I love Mario 64. But there are things aesthetically about it that maybe I don't like as much as, say, the NES games. And the same goes for like
Okay.
Mario Sunshine. I would say that was even further off the mark of, the Koopas didn't really feel like like an army anymore, didn't really feel like a threat anymore. It was just kind
Mhm.
of laid back and goofy in a way. And like I remember playing Mario 3, and there's the airships and all this stuff, and like it felt epic in a way. And Mario wasn't that anymore. As much as I loved the game still, I felt like they were drifting further from how I saw Mario, as a kid playing the
Interesting.
NES. And so
Yeah.
I had all these ideas where like, oh, I want to have these like big battles with like the airships and tanks from Mario 3. I want to have, Fire Mario. Fire Mario we hadn't seen since Super Mario World, with like not in any
Oh, you're
meaningful
right,
way
yeah.
anyway. Like the major Mario games, at least like 64 and Sunshine, no Fire Mario, which was like such a staple. And so in this animation, I have these scenes like where Mario is wearing like the white and red Fire Mario costume, and like at the time, in the first half of 2006, like even just seeing a Mario model wearing those clothes was like a novelty, right? Because we hadn't seen Mario in 3D really do that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think even Smash Brothers had like that outfit for him. So I say all this to say, like, I wanted to see some of these classic things in Mario again. I wanted to see Mario go to more epic places. And I, I realized that this was too big for me to make into a thing. Really. So I just made this trailer. And I did release it on YouTube. I don't recommend people look it up on YouTube. I recommend people watch it in the video that I'm going to do, because the YouTube upload is from 2006 and the quality is really bad and the audio is out of sync. So don't look at it there. I'm working on like remastering it for this
Okay.
My Life in
Okay.
Gaming video I'm doing. Anyway, I say all this to say I show this trailer to my class and stuff, and I finish this. I get this desire to create this Mario thing off my chest. I get it out of my system. And then New Super Mario Brothers comes out just a few weeks later, and it brings back all of these 2D elements, and some of the classic superpowers like the Fire Flower that I wanted to see in Mario again. And it finally, like just weeks after I do this presentation, it's there. And
Yeah.
literally the day that I did my presentation, Super Mario Galaxy was shown off at E3, which went even farther beyond what I personally could have imagined for Mario. So it's like I I all through this time I'm developing this thing, and I have all this like pent up desire for Mario to be something like I imagined as a kid and even beyond that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was that again. And I didn't feel like upset that like my stupid little 3D fan film like didn't have any, like it was almost like it had no purpose anymore, right? Because all I wanted to do was to show things that I wanted to be in Mario. But
Hmm.
now Mario like was finally that again. It was finally 2D again. It finally had old school power-ups again. And in Mario Galaxy, it was going places I never dreamed it could be going. So it was like obsolete, like basically from the moment it released. But in that span of years through college leading up to that, it was like there's like I want Mario to do all this stuff again. And I don't know, I'm rambling, but like that's why I say it was emotional for me, because Mario was finally coming back to some of the things I wanted to see. And even though the game in retrospect is very, like I said before, sterile and safe from an aesthetic perspective, it it was still fresh at the time.
And it really brought a whole bunch of new ideas to the series, but like you said, it didn't. Then I'd have to replay the other new Super Mario Bros. Actually, one of the new games in the new series, quote unquote, that I haven't played is New Super Mario Bros. U. I've played New Super Mario Bros. 1 and 2, the DS and the 3DS game, but I have not played New Super Mario Bros. U or Luigi U. Or at the time of this recording, I haven't played. I've played a little bit of New Super Mario Bros. Wii, which we are covering later this month, and I will have played a lot more of it, if not hopefully beaten it by the time I do record that episode. But at the time, though, this game introduced a lot of amazing mechanics that we didn't really see we didn't see at all in Mario games at that point. Now, before we dive into the mechanics, though, you're talking about all the video production talk you brought up there with your story. I have something that in doing research, I found something kind of bizarre, and video production kind of ties into it. So, to promote New Super Mario Brothers for the Nintendo DS, Nintendo actually commissioned an outside company. I forget the name of the company off the top of my head. I will try to find it in the meantime. But they commissioned a new Super Mario Brother. They commissioned a video podcast to promote New Super Mario Brothers, and you can
Oh
find this
wow.
video podcast on the Internet Archive. And I'm going to try to
I
look up
I have never heard of this. That's wild.
Now, what's crazy about it is I'm going to try to find the Internet Archive. Yeah, so you can find it, and it was commissioned by Nintendo of America. I'm trying to find who the video production company of it was. So I'll look it up. I have the video on right now, so while I'm going to see it in a second while I'm talking. But it was cool because it had interviews with a lot of people in the um from the game. It starts off with a little intro, which it's only like 40 seconds, and then there's an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, a little snippet on, and that's like 4 minutes long, and then there's a little 2-minute video podcast about the Nintendo DS Lite, what we were talking about before, how it was all coming out at the same time. Then there's a small review from it, and the company's name, by the way, was GoTV. In fact, I actually looked up the guy who was running all the interviews for this is a guy named Dalen, and I was actually able to find him on LinkedIn. I'm actually really tempted to he runs his own production company now. He seems like he's well off up there, but I'm very tempted to try to get a hold of him and be like, do you remember doing this? Because the last video try is him interviewing Mario, like a dude in a full-on Mario suit. And what's crazy about it is it was very clear from the video that Charles Martinet was there because he's responding in Mario's voice. You don't see him on camera. You just see Mario doing, like hand gestures and head nods and all this other stuff. But in Mario's voice, he's answering the questions that Dalen is asking. So I'm fairly certain that Charles Martinet was just off the camera, on the set, but off camera.
Doing a performance, yeah.
Exactly. And my jaw dropped on the floor when, in character, Charles Martinet makes a dick joke to this guy. So he's asking about like, oh, how have the games evolved over the years, and the one guy, and Dalen says in the interview, I wrote it down, he goes, you've got a lot of years under your belt, and then he kind of goes into what with different power-ups, blah blah blah, like, just that was the start of the sentence that led into a question, and it was just the start was, you've got a lot of years under your belt, and Martinet responds, let me tell you, I got a lot under my belt, period.
Wow.
He might have meant Mario's stomach, but that's not the first thing I think of when I think of below the belt. So the only thing I can think of is that he made a really sneaky dick joke, and no one knows about it. I was losing it, dude.
I mean, gosh, a video podcast like that at the time, that would be kind of I don't know,
advanced.
I wouldn't think that would be much of a thing, because like YouTube was so new, and the quality of YouTube was so bad in those early days, and otherwise, like you downloaded videos for the most part from the internet. You didn't really watch them like through a streaming interface on a website as much. I mean, it existed, but it wasn't as established as it is now. So that's like, I'm almost just like, who even was the audience for this? Because like, I feel like I was constantly tuned into video game news, especially Nintendo news. And what you're describing like does not ring any bells at all. And I feel like if I didn't see this at that time, like who even watched it?
That's what I'm wondering too. I'll send you the link on Discord. I just sent it to you now, so if you want to watch it later, you have easy access to it. But it was one of the craziest things I've ever seen, and I had the same thought as you. I'm like, podcasting in 2006, especially, was not a medium anyone knew about. It was so obscure. Like, podcasting didn't really explode until like 2014-ish. Like, it was gradually growing, but then when Serial hit, that's when like podcasting just went like exploded. But it's just wild to me, and it's officially licensed by Nintendo because Charles Martinet is doing the voice. Nintendo would not allow that
Yeah,
ever if it
yeah.
wasn't an officially licensed or sanctioned thing. Um, and they have an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto. That's another crazy thing. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen, just for the sheer fact of it existing. Not necessarily like everything is really boilerplate and kind of boring up until that Mario interview where he
Yeah.
does the dick joke. But it still like blew my mind, and that's where I got some of the information how they wanted to take advantage of the nostalgia factor, how they wanted to kind of go back to more simplistic gameplay so it was more accessible to non-gamers, which if you think about Nintendo's mantra kind of at the time, that was very much them. The whole idea of the Wii was to bring in the non-gamer, to expand the gaming audience as wide as possible. So it's not surprising that they were the focal point of the new Super Mario Brothers for the DS was going to be more accessible. The development team, I found in a Nintendo Power interview with Takashi Tezuka, and the development team for this game actually originally worked on the Mario Advance games, like the ports of Super Mario Brothers to the
Oh,
GBA,
okay. Okay.
and also they did Yoshi Touch and Go, which
Hmm.
I have not played. I don't know if
It's
I've ever. Have
you
you?
know that's kind of from that early era of DS where I feel like for the first like roughly 6 months of the DS's life, almost everything released on it was either a port of like an N64 game like Mario 64 and Ridge Racer, um, or it was like sort of a experimental touchscreen thing or a mini game, and like we didn't really get like any full on like real meaty games for a while. Yeah, Yoshi Touch and Go is like, it feels like something that would have been a mini game in like a Yoshi game on the DS, but like things were, at the time they were calling the DS a third pillar. You remember
Yes.
that? Where
Hmm.
they have the GameCube, they have the GBA, and the DS is not replacing the GBA. But it was like, it was very obvious, I think, to almost everyone, really, that they were only saying that because it was such a gamble as to whether the DS was actually going to succeed. And
Hmm.
ultimately, once it got the games out there, it did succeed, and then the GBA sort of went to the wayside. But they were just kind of leaving that option where, okay, if DS doesn't work, we'll stick with the Game Boy line, the single screen, purely button based gameplay if this doesn't work. Obviously it did work, but you say that they worked on those ports. This game is for the most part very much an extension of the traditional kind of game development at Nintendo, as opposed to the more experimental uh, dual screen or touch screen sort of aspects. Because this game, yeah, it has a touch screen, but like all you do with it is release your sub items or look at the world
The
map
coins,
and stuff
the
like
extra,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a HUD essentially. It doesn't do anything innovative or necessary that necessitates it being on the DS system.
the what the mini games definitely take more advantage of the touch screen. I mean, that's pretty much
For
all you
sure.
can do. That they're almost all touchscreen based. Some other last final notes on, because I couldn't find a whole lot on the development. I know like a lot of times like the Iwata asks have a lot of good info on these big major titles around this time. In fact, for Super Mario Galaxy, there's so much info in the Iwata ask
Wow,
article for that.
I forgot they even started that far back.
Yeah, they're archived. Now, the thing is though, they do cover New Super Mario Brothers 2 on the Iwata archive on the Iwata Asks, but I don't know if that would, I didn't want to read that because I didn't know how much of that would be beneficial to the original. I'm sure there might have been
Mm.
something, but in any case, they in this game, they, like I said, they wanted to go for a more simplistic style because they wanted to harken back to, they specifically used the original Super Mario Brothers as a focal point. They also wanted to go 2D for this because there was already a 3D Mario on the Nintendo DS, which was the
Right.
port of Super Mario 64. So I do kind of find it amusing that they're like, well, we already have a 3D Mario. I'm like, sort of. I mean, they did add a lot of features to Super Mario 64 DS, which I guess it was different enough from the original. There was a lot of stuff they added to it, but that's neither here nor there. And they went this game. There's Mario is a 3D model, but a lot of the enemies and everything are just 2D sprites that he interacts with, and
Although
that's why
they're based on 3D models, but you're
yes,
absolutely
it's kind of
right.
almost
I
like in
think
the vein of like Donkey Kong Country.
right, and I think it's because like Mario himself obviously has to have more fluid animations and has to do more varied moves. Uh, so then compared to the enemies, which just do their walk cycles pretty much.
That's literally exactly it. 3D models were easier to make expressive and scale and all that other stuff than like a sprite. So that's why they went with that. The last bit, and this kind of ties into music, but I think just because it's only one little final note with this, the music in this game, the enemies will actually jump to the time of the music. It's something you don't
Mhm.
notice necessarily, but when the beat of the music, they will hop to the beat of the music and they'll kind of react to the different musical stings that the song will go through on the level. So that way it kind of like almost subconsciously it allows the player to kind of mentally prepare for like mentally plan out what the enemy's going to do and like and kind of figure out what they're going to do in advance. Which I think is crazy impressive. Like it's such a small detail, but that really
Mhm.
adds a cool layer to the game design, in my opinion. To kind of round out our setup of like we've talked about our personal experiences, we've talked about like what Nintendo was kind of like back in 2006. Like we said, it had been 13 and a half years at that time since the previous 2D Mario game, which was a Game Boy 2D Mario game. So
Yeah.
if you don't count that, which, like you said, they do have a very different feel, then
And
you're
there was
going back even
also
further.
not not all that many months before there was also Super Princess Peach, which
Yes.
is probably like in some ways even closer to Super Mario Brothers than say like the Yoshi's Island games. So we shouldn't forget that. I mean, that game is okay. It was externally developed though. I'm going to look this up real quick because I'm going to assume it's Tosei, but I'm not positive.
I actually really liked Super Princess Peach. It has it's one of those ones where it's like it was a cool idea, but at the same time it's problematic might be too strong of a term, but the fact that all of Princess Peach's like powers are based off of her emotions is kind of like
Yeah.
like really really
Yeah. It's
it's just
yeah,
it's a
I
little
just looked it
cringy.
up though. It was a Tosei game, which Tosei makes extraordinarily serviceable games. Not necessarily bursting with creativity or finesse, but they get the job done. And I
The
will say, like, funny enough, Super Princess Peach came out while I was in the middle of because I remember playing it really hard over spring break, my final semester in college. So this was the
okay.
middle of when I was working so hard on this 3D animation trailer. And I remember just like completely 100%ing the game in like the span of that spring break week because I probably enjoyed the game better than it deserved just because I was so uh exhausted
Starved.
and stressed uh from working in
Oh,
college,
okay.
and it was just like such a relief to just like step back and just like devour a video game, even if it was like just an extremely okay video game.
Yeah.
It was a chill and relaxing experience, and I needed it at the time, but I've never really revisited it.
I played it. When did I play that game? Actually, I think I might have played Super Princess Peach on my honeymoon. I want to say
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I got married in a couple years ago now. It was I was like 28 when I got married. So I played it later on. Like I said it before, but like the DS was something that, in fact, handhelds in general has flown, like it completely missed me all the time because I never owned handheld consoles up until I could had my own steady job after high school, and I bought a PS Vita and a 3DS. And even then, I played my Vita a ton, and then I barely touched my 3DS. Now I'm all over the place. I'm trying to really focus in, and like, problem is I get distracted by too much. So I always try to focus on like, oh, I haven't played this game, so let me do that. And then I'll get something interested in something else. I'm like, oh, I haven't played this game yet, and I'll put down the game I started and start up another game it's a mess. Anyway, we to continue on with this, to round, like I was going to say, we were going to round out our kind of discussion on the build up to this. New Super Mario Brothers ended up being a huge, gigantic hit for Nintendo.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise that this spawned a whole series of new Super Mario Brothers, new 2D Mario games. I normally try to keep legacy at the end. I think we could go into a little bit more detailed legacy discussions towards the end of the episode, but I just to kind of put it in perspective, New Super Mario Brothers is the best selling DS game of all time by a decent margin. If you look at the top five, right? If you look at the top five selling DS, 3D, not 3DS, I'm right, DS and DSi games, number five is Pokemon Diamond and Pearl at 17.67 mil.
It's kind of
Uh,
shocking a Pokemon game wouldn't have beaten New Super Mario Brothers, to tell you the truth.
oh, it's not even close.
That's
Brain
kind
Age
of
is at
wild.
Brain Age is number four with 19.01 million. Number three is Mario Kart DS. That's not surprising. Mario Kart
That's
games
not
always
surprising.
sell an insane amount. That's at 23.6 mil. Number two, Nintendogs.
Oh, okay. There you go.
23.96 million. I've never played a Nintendogs game. Uh, but 23.96 million does not lie. And of course, like I said, at number one, sorry, 23.96 million. I might have said 29. 23.96 million was Nintendogs. And then at number one, 30.8 million copies was New Super Mario Brothers. Like it's almost a 7 mil difference between the first and second place in the total sales for that. And by the way, I'm getting these numbers from Nintendo's own website. Like this isn't like from Wikipedia. This is from Nintendo's own
Mm.
website. So this is as authentic as you can possibly get. It's just wild. Now, actually, it's kind of cool. It shows what their number one sellers for all from the DS and up are. That's kind of interesting. But anyway, that's neither here. Actually, we could talk about it at least because we are covering this game later on. New Super Mario Brothers Wii, since this is kind of like it was kind of like the next game in the series for
It
I would
was. It
assume
was.
from 30.32 million. So it sold about the same in terms
Wow.
of yeah,
And it was a
slightly
packing
less.
game for a long time too. So
I mean, that's only number four on the Wii. Not unsurprisingly, Wii Sports is the highest selling because that was a
of
pack-in
course.
that had 82.9 million copies. It's just even Wii Sports Resort sold 33 million. That's insane. But in any case, so things that they added to New Super Mario Brothers. I mean, let's dive into the gameplay a little bit with this.
Right.
There isn't much to say necessarily in terms of like we're not going to break down each level and all that other stuff. That would
Yeah.
get boring real fast. But it is worth noting just some of the things they added. There's two, like we said at the beginning, there are the main power ups. You have the super mushroom and you have the fire flower, but they also added specifically there's these two new power ups that change Mario's size even more. You have the super mushroom and then the mini mushroom, or what I don't know if it's the tiny mushroom, but basically super mushroom turned Mario gigantic. You can knock off pipes, you can crush blocks, you are invulnerable for a short period of time. It was a really I mean it was you can get it on the very first level, and it really just I mean it was meant to be a selling point. Like you played that level um that like in the demo version of the game, that was the level that you played. It was a great way to market the game.
Yeah.
Jeremy Parrish on Retronauts, I was listening to their podcast on, and he talks about how he was at E3 when this game was coming out, and he went over to the Nintendo booth and played this game, like a demo version of this game, and he was just blown away by that first level. And the first level really shows off a lot of great stuff that did and did not pan out for the rest of the game, but it was really cool
Yeah.
in that first level.
I mean, I would argue that with the Mega Mushroom though, like to me, it's kind of a little bit superficial in its
Oh, it is
gameplay
100%.
application because like it's really just for the spectacle of like, you know, here's a Mario as tall as the screen. You can charge through everything. You can break blocks that are unbreakable in every other Mario game, you know, like those little like, you know, blocks that they use to make the stairs and stuff like that. You can
Mm-hmm.
just plow right through it. I mean, it's fun, it's a spectacle. Does it add a lot to the gameplay? Not really. I would say that, I mean, it's kind of just another version of the Superstar, basically. Uh,
It
except with
is.
that, I think there's a little more pressure to sort of go fast and see how far you can get, and also more challenge in terms of like making sure you don't die while you're rushing through enemies, like by, you know, falling into a pit or something like that. I think the star is a more interesting power up than the Mega Mushroom. I think the Mega Mushroom is a little more gimmicky, but you know, it is fun. It's fun, and it's, you know, it's become a it has certainly returned to the series here and there.
Well, it was specific. You're 100% right, because there's a reason why you don't get it often throughout the game, because it ruins the level design. Like
Yeah,
there's it,
it kind of does.
there's a reason why you can only get it so infrequently, because the reason you get it on the first level is because that first level is specifically designed around that gimmick, because you can get away with
Mm,
Mario stomping
yeah,
on everything, because the first level there's very little tight platforming that you have to worry about. And so it makes sense why it was included on that level. The mini mushroom arguably has a lot more uses, because
absolutely.
you have to go back to levels you previously completed and get some of the coins. So I guess it is worth saying, in each of the level there are three big coins that you hit in each level that you play, excuse me, there are three big coins that you can collect, and you can use those coins to either buy, usually get into like mushroom huts and other different areas. You can also use them if you save up enough to buy skins for the bottom, like a visual design type of thing for the bottom DS screen, which is kind of interesting. Um, so you there's three coins per level in pretty much every level. And what's cool, Jeremy Parrish also said this on Retronauts, so I don't want to steal his observation, but I think it's worth bringing up. The level design is really strong, and they also say this on the show, where it's like you can tell they were still getting kind of like their 2D design chops back, but at least in this first level, you know, if you get the Mega Mushroom and you see this whole thing, you know, it balloons up and you go, holy shit, what is that? And you grab it and then you storm across the level. When you beat it, you're going to find that you missed one of the three coins. You got the
Mm,
beginning and end one. And it was handy because the coins at the bottom of the screen, when you collect a coin, it goes into the slot in the location of the level. So if you get the middle coin, that is the second of the three coins within the level. So if you missed the first slot and the coin you collect goes into the second, that means somewhere previous in the level you missed the first coin. So you can
you know
either,
where to look.
exactly. So really smart design, in my opinion, because it gives players at least an idea of like, okay, I have to find it before this one location. Um, and when you play through that first level with the Mega Mushroom, you'll find that you get the first and third coin and you miss the second. And it's because when you get the Mega Mushroom, you destroy a pipe that you can travel down, and that's where
Yep.
you get the missing second coin. So it incentivizes players to go back from the very first level. It incentivizes players to go back and explore the levels to their fullest, because there's lots of cool stuff that you can see in there, whether it's through the mini mushrooms, where sometimes you'll be going through a level and you'll see a tiny little pipe for Mario to
Yep.
walk through, and you don't have a mini mushroom at the time, so, and there might not even be one in the level, so you have to find one later on, store it, and then go back to it. There's lots of cool stuff like
Yeah.
that.
And in fact, the game actually, the worlds have branching paths. You
Hmm.
actually have to beat some of the bosses as Mini Mario in order to take the hidden path after the boss to reach the alternative world. So even though it is an 8 world game, as you know, was standard for Super Mario Brothers, um, you would actually only play through 6 worlds your first time through the game. So if you wanted to see all the levels, you did, which was that was a fun challenge. Not only do you have to find a mini mushroom, you have to be able to get through the level with Mini Mario. You have to be able to beat the boss with Mini Mario, which is not necessarily an easy task. You're absolutely right when you say that the mini mushroom is more impactful to the gameplay. I like the mini mushroom a lot because it 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 is it's Mario becomes more difficult to control, but
Yes.
in a fun way.
Hmm.
Because
It's very
I
floaty.
remember one of my friends like kind of called it more like Ninja Mario because you could just do these crazy long floaty jumps, and the way that you wall jump off the walls is a lot crazier. Which I guess we should also point out, wall jumping is new to 2D Mario with this game.
Yes, that's one of the other
Which
mechanics they add.
I've been thinking about that the whole time that you've been talking about how they were saying like, oh, they alienate a lot of players with the going into 3D in a lot of ways, and they really want to go back to the basics. And I always actually found it to be a little bit of a strange choice that is simple and back to the basics as this game is. They put wall jumping in, which is uh, it's not like difficult like on the level of say like Super Metroid wall jumping. I
Oh,
think is
I hate
really
Super Metroid
difficult.
wall jumping.
I hate it. Oh gosh, I hate it so much. Great game, but
Yeah.
I very briefly hate Super Metroid at certain points in the game. Then I get over it
Yep.
because man, wall jumping in that game is not fun. But it's sort of Mega Man X style wall jumping because you cling to the wall and slide down it, which is it's similar to what they did in Mario Sunshine, where I actually think wall jumping in Super Mario 64 is quite easy. You just, when you time your hit to when you hit the wall.
Hmm.
Um, but I'll acknowledge that the Sunshine style, which is Mega Man at what I like to call Mega Man X style, which I think is kind of the standard these days, where you slide down the wall and just hit the button when you want. Um, but I still felt in 2D it was still a little bit technical, especially because Mario falls down the wall pretty fast, faster than I would
Yeah.
say Mega Man X. So it threw me off at first because I was not used to wall jumping in 2D Mario. It was very strange to me at first.
And there's that one level, I don't remember which world it is in, but I remember playing it. I was actually watching the completionist video on this just to kind of get, because he does like such a good like overall perspective on games, not necessarily the nitty too far into the nitty gritty, but I was watching some of his clips from it, and I forgot about this one level where it's a like it's a bunch of blocks, and they're kind of like in a upside down, they're in a shape of like a U, but like with it's like, but it's like a point, it's like a rectangle but with one side missing,
Okay.
the bottom of the rectangle missing, and it's like longer, it's taller than it is wide, and you it gets pulled up throughout the level, and you have to be on the inside of it, constantly wall jumping back and forth
Oh
from
wow.
one side of the inside of that rectangle
I
to
don't
the
quite
other.
remember it.
And you can't fall, but you can't just stop wall jumping because there's no bottom to that rectangle. You just have the top. So Mario's hitting at the top of that rectangle, bumping his head, going over the other side, sliding down quickly, and you have to do that consistently over and over and over again until you get to the top of wherever it takes you, because the rectangle is moving through the level, or the level's moving around the rectangle, at the very least. I don't know if that's in one of the more challenging levels. Maybe it's in one of the hidden levels that you have to get access to. It's not part of the core 6 that they kind of designed. But I remember playing that and being like, I really loved it. It was a really fun challenge. But
Mhm.
if you're not experienced in 2D Mario games, that's a pretty difficult thing to do. It's one thing to do a handful of wall jumps, but it's another thing to maintain a series of wall
Yeah.
jumps over an extended period of time. And that's what that level asked you to do. Um, I'm with you though. I think the mini Mario is really fun because of the floaty physics. The wall jumps are really fun. I actually really like some of my favorite levels in Super Mario Maker are when they take the new Super
Yeah.
Mario Bros. Physics and they use those wall jumps to your advantage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Sometimes it's a little
I
infuriating.
certainly got used to it over the course of of the new series, but it was
Hmm.
like it just like I kept forgetting I could even do it because it was just such a
Yeah.
strange thing to find in 2D Mario to me at that time. But speaking of the physics, a lot of people, um, talk about how different the physics are, and they are different, but at the same time, I still feel like Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario World, New Super Mario Brothers, the mechanics are still all in the same ballpark, and I can move from one to the other without feeling like anything is too strange or too off. Whereas,
Hmm.
if you want to compare it to, say, another 2D platforming series that Nintendo revived, Donkey Kong Country Returns and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, those are games I kind of hate. I hate to say it. Tropical Freeze is like aesthetically perfect, but the controls throw me so far off because the way that Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3 on the Super Nintendo control is just so burned into my soul. And
Hmm.
they deviate pretty strongly from how those games feel. And if you look at it with that context, I don't think that the new Super Mario Brothers games are radically different when it comes
I would
down to it
agree.
from how the NES and Super Nintendo games feel.
They still it still feels good to play. I was telling
Absolutely,
you off mic that I was playing New Super Mario Brothers on my lunch breaks at work in preparation for this episode, and it's still fun to play. Like I
absolutely.
always I always thought that this series, I know I you said it perfectly earlier, where it's now divisive. It's a very divisive entry in the Mario series for newer fans generally don't mind it as much. Older fans, I'm not even saying that as an ageist thing, but in general, people who grew up with NES and Super Nintendo Mario don't have as high of opinion of the new Super Mario games as younger people do. And I'm kind of in that weird middle group where it's like I'm old enough to have experienced the old school Mario games, but I didn't because I didn't own the consoles as a
Mhm.
kid. My parents didn't buy them for me.
And see, they were
So
they were the most formative games for me
for
personally.
so many people
Period.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I play this game, I don't have that necessarily that level of comparison. I notice the differences on just a purely aesthetic level, both not just aesthetic, but like even with the controls, I notice those differences. But in terms of the design, it doesn't necessarily bother me as much.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I when I was playing through this game, I still found it really just fun and enjoyable. And I never understood the hate that the series got for per se. I do think your point. I understand it actually a bit more now though. With your point at the beginning of the episode, where how if you look back at like what Mario was prior to this, with Super Mario Brothers, the Super Mario Brothers 2 we got, and then Super Mario Brothers 3, and then World, each game is so iterative. Like they're so drastically different and the same at the same time, which is
Yes, yes.
a very hard balance to pull off. And when you get to New Super Mario Brothers, it might have been disappointing to some fans of the original games, but in general, it was still a really solid game, and the team was really kind of I think Retronaut said it well, where it's like it was them learning their 2D chops again. It was them kind of
Yeah,
getting their
yeah,
feet wet on how to design a Mario game in 2D again. And
yeah.
then they refined it. And a lot of people love New Super Mario Bros. 2 and New Super Mario Bros. U and Wii and all that other stuff. So I'm actually very excited to really dive into Wii after before I record that episode. And it just I can see it a little bit more with this one. There wasn't enough iteration between entries in the
Yeah.
series.
I mean, the
And,
saddest thing to me, I mean, me of all people who just, devours all things, Mario platforming related, I skipped New Super Mario Brothers 2 on the 3DS for like 4 or 5 years, because it came out like I want to say just a couple of months before New Super Mario Brothers U. And since
mm,
U was going to be like the first HD Mario game, it was going to be launching alongside the console. I wanted, and I was going to be playing it with my friends like day one. Like I wanted that experience to feel really special and fresh. And I thought, like, man, what are they doing releasing these two games so close together? Like, it's too much. So I actually skipped it for a long time. And then when I finally got around to getting it, for like $15, it was on sale. And I was just like, it made me sleepy because it was so much of the same thing. And I don't know, that made me sad because hey, this brought back New Super Mario Brothers 2 brought back the raccoon tail power up from Super Mario
hmm
Brothers 3. And it had all these other things in it that would have blown my mind to see come back in it had those features been in New Super Mario Brothers in 2006. And yet because they just retread the same ground with the new series so much and added so relatively little and changed things up visually and gameplay wise so relatively little throughout the new series. New Super Mario Brothers became boring after, 3 or 4 entries. But at the time, uh, it was just so exciting to have a game like this at all. In fact, I remember I expected this, like, in my mind, this was Super Mario Brothers 5, right? Like,
yeah,
leading up to it, I like this was a big deal. This was a game that was going to be, an all-time great, an all-time classic, this is going to be, in the rankings of, the top 20 games ever made, just like
yeah, yeah,
the first 4 games were. That's what I thought this would be. And I loved it when I played it. I, 100% it. And then even one step further, like I went through all the levels again without using any power ups. Like I wanted to,
wow,
I did this all in the week it released because I was like, I expected this game to make an imprint on my mind like every level in Super Mario Brothers 3 and every level in Super Mario World. Like I can visualize them, I know them, I remember them. Like I can play either of those games, go into any level and be like, oh yeah, this one. I remember this level. Whereas I don't get that experience. Like I thought I would have that experience with New Super Mario Brothers on DS. I thought I would revisit it years later, and all of these levels would feel distinctive in my mind. But ultimately, they never really made that impression. And I don't know if that's just because over the years, New Super Mario Brothers diluted itself so much, or if there really is something to the level design that made it less impactful, or if it was just because I played the NES and Super Nintendo games when I was so much younger and my brain was more malleable for those games to have the impact and permanent
yeah.
impression that they did have at that time.
I definitely think it was that last one. I think in general when I feel like there's that window. I've talked about it on this podcast and other podcasts. There's like a window. I mean, hell, I think I said it on the Final Fantasy VII episode. There's a window of time in between like 8 and like 15 years old, maybe 17 as well, where like those games that you play are so formative to you. Like they
Mhm.
ingrain in your memory like no other games ever will. And you sometimes I feel like gamers, this is more of a cynical view to look at it. I feel like gamers are constantly chasing that high of like trying to
Yep.
relive that
Yep.
same feeling and that sense of wonderment. And it
It's
And sometimes I
yeah.
wonder if like the reason I do this podcast and the way I dissect games like this, whether I have a strong love for them or not, but the reason I try to break down the history and dissect games is that I get that sense of wonderment through this. Like
Mm,
this is my way of reliving that emotion by being able to take games that maybe playing through it didn't give me that emotion, but being able to talk about it in like a really uh I was going to say philosophical, it's not philosophical, but like a really analytical, that's the word I'm looking for, in a more analytical approach, in a more analytical way. I think that kind of helps that. So I feel like gamers are constantly chasing that high. And when you find something that does that for you, it is so hard to let go of it. I think
mhm.
not the last time, when was the last time that I really Pikmin, when I played Pikmin last year for the first time, it kind of gave me a bit of that feeling. I really fell in love with that
Mm.
game. But the last time a game like that truly, like, where I can remember the specific moments where a game did that to me, um is either Super Mario Galaxy when I first moved in with my wife, because I remember it was in the room I'm recording this, and I actually, I'm not going to tell the story because we have Super Mario Galaxy next, so I got to save that for that episode. But the other example was World of Warcraft. The first time I played World of Warcraft, and I didn't have any background in Warcraft. It's not like I cared about the lore at the time. I just, my friends played it, so I was like, all right, I'm going to try this out finally. And this was back at the Wrath of Lich King expansion, and I remember the first time I went up to Orgrimmar, and I literally remember walking out of this, like this valley, like it was this canyon. Sorry, the road goes through a canyon from the orc starting area up into Orgrimmar, and I remember coming out, and the canyon wall slowly descends. So like you're going up a hill, and the canyon walls are slowly getting smaller and smaller and smaller because you're climbing out steadily. And when I got to the top of the hill, I got out of the canyon. There was a giant zeppelin that flew over my head, like from like across the screen. And then I just saw the giant Orgrimmar walls, and I went, "Holy shit! This is this is a city. Like this isn't just like, I had never seen a game that had a full fledged city that people could interact within." And
Mhm.
I remember walking, and I was like, "Okay, that's kind of cool, but there's going to be a loading zone, or there's going to be, something where it's not nearly as impressive on the inside as it is on the outside." And then you just walk into the city, and it's just fucking huge, and it blew my mind when I first played it. And I feel like I went on a complete tangent from what we originally started at, but I feel like, to go back to what you were saying about why this game might not have clicked with you as much, is gamers are constantly chasing that high. We are constantly looking for that same sense of wonderment. And if a game doesn't give you that, it's never
Mhm.
going to hit as hard as like what the original versions of that game did.
Yeah, and I think it took me, I would say, years for it to sink in that this game didn't have the impact on me that those other games did. Like at the time I played it, I'm like, oh wow, this was great. I really enjoyed it. Me and my friends were all talking about blah 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 blah, and here I am thinking all these things that are fresh on my mind. In this first week of just binging this game, I'm thinking these memories that are as clear to me right now as Super Mario Brothers 3 is, as clear to me as Super Mario World is. I'm thinking it's going to stay that way because of the imprint those games made on my brain.
Hmm.
And over the years, it was just like, wow, I don't remember like any levels in New Super Mario Brothers DS like at all. I remember the mechanics of the game. I remember certain little things, but it's like I just can't load up a level in this game and be like, oh yeah, this one. Whereas Super
Hmm.
Mario Brothers uh 3, it's like, oh yeah, this is the Kuribo shoe level. Oh yeah, this is the level with those red winged things that don't exist in any other level. Oh yeah, this is the fortress with this and that, and this is the level with the coins and the enemies frozen into ice cubes, and this is the level like this and that. And I can remember those things from those games, and maybe if someone had played New Super Mario Brothers when they were 6, 7 years old, and maybe they remember maybe those levels are as distinctive to them today. Maybe they're in
Hmm.
their 20s today, and they play, maybe they play Super Mario Brothers 3 or Super Mario World for the first time, when they're, I would have been 22 when this game came out. Maybe they play the games that I played when I was, an elementary school student. Maybe they played those games for the first time when they were 22, and in 5 years they're not going to remember a thing about Mario 3 or Mario World, but they still remember everything about New Super Mario Brothers DS because it's the one that they played when they were a kid, and it's the one that made them a Mario fan and left the greatest imprint.
I will say, to the older games credit, I didn't grow up with them because, like I said, I didn't have those consoles growing up. But I can still remember, like, I mean, I've played a lot of Super Mario World. Like, I didn't play Super Mario. I didn't beat Super Mario World until I was in my mid 20s, right? So, like, I was a late bloomer when it comes to this type of thing. And I still consider Super Mario World my favorite Mario game. Like, I'm not even saying that to be like diplomatic or anything like that, or just like to appease a retro gaming crowd or anything like that. I genuinely like Super Mario Bros. 2, even though probably the first one I played was actually probably the first one I played was Mario 3. But I don't know. I can see that. I see what you're saying, and I think this game ultimately its biggest legacy is that it bred its biggest legacy was that it created a whole group of young Mario fans, and it
Yeah.
revitalized. I genuinely wonder how much of an impact the reception of this game had on kind of revitalizing 2D game design, like
Yeah, I
keeping
mean,
it
that
alive.
that loops back around to what we were talking about at the very beginning. I was afraid 2D gaming was going to die, and this game did happen pretty early on, relatively early on, like a year and a half ish into the DS's life. And
Hmm.
you're absolutely right. Like, maybe the renewed popularity of 2D gaming would not have happened to nearly the same scale that it's happened now. I mean, it's probably inevitable that indie game development would have taken off, and making a 2D game is probably more feasible for a small team or a single developer compared to a 3D game in a lot of cases. So there probably still would have been a lot of 2D indie games, but this game really, you're right. I mean, it's really hard to gauge for sure the impact it had on ensuring that 2D gaming still continued to be a big deal. Because
I almost. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, well, I was just going to say, because the PSP came out, right around the same time as the DS as well, and it was really pushing to have that like PS2 experience,
Yep.
but on a handheld, and it did do that a lot. But you know what? It also got a lot of 2D games, so maybe developers like Capcom and Konami that made a lot of 2D games on the PSP. Maybe in some ways they were chasing what New Super Mario Brothers was when they brought, Mega Man X and Castlevania and uh, Ghouls and Ghosts and stuff like that to the PSP. They may have very well been looking at the success of New Super Mario Brothers and further reestablish that, hey, it's cool and okay to have 2D games on a 3D capable system, which was not cool and okay for many years there, unfortunately.
I wonder too if, like, I 100% agree that the indie game scene would have totally brought back 2D game design in one shape or form or another. Uh, I do wonder though if New Super Mario Brothers were able to make 2D design more palatable to a younger generation. Like, if all they grew
Yes,
up with was 3D games, and
you're
then this
absolutely
indie
right.
movement comes out in like the early 2010s with like Super Meat Boy and like all everything else, that kind of like the indie movement really started off in around that time. I wonder if it would have been as successful as it has ended up being. Because now you look at games like Dead Cells and Celeste. I love Celeste. That's one of the best like 2D platformers I've ever played. Ori and the Blind Forest, a
Mhm.
Metroidvania, but still it's a 2D side scroller, and it's I wonder if these games, how I genuinely, this isn't me being declarative saying, oh, these games owe a lot to New Super Mario Brothers. I'm genuinely wonder. I wonder how much New Super Mario Brothers ended up affecting things, just because, I
Right.
mean, 30 million
You
copies is a shitload. That's,
I
if you look
mean,
at the attach rate, like that's, I mean, what is, I think the DS family of systems sold like, it was just below the PS2. PS2 sold like 150 mil, and I want to say, so this is like 148 or like 149. So if you look at like 30 million units sold, that's like a fifth of, almost a fifth of the, like that's a fifth attach rate. That's insane.
yeah, well, and if if you think about it, we have probably both played 2D modern 2D games that were designed by someone who was a kid when they first played New Super Mario Brothers. That might be the game that, as you said, like opened up a younger generation to the idea of 2D gameplay being fun and enjoyable and cool. And unbeknownst to us, someone might have been 10 years old or less, and they'd be in their, early to mid to early 20s to late 20s, probably designed a game we've played and enjoyed very much. And that's just funny to think about because I would just graduated college when this game came out for me.
Hmm.
But it could have had an impact on how younger people who might be a decade and a half or so younger than me, it really could have had an impact on how they approach 2D games and what they think of them, and if they want to make them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we got to start wrapping up this episode, but I think that's a good place to. I wanted to bring up the music a little bit, but I wish I would have brought it up sooner, because this would have been a perfect way to end the episode. This kind of this discussion of New Super Mario Brothers Legacy. So,
Yeah.
listeners, for those who are this far into the episode, please write in and let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think New Super Mario Brothers, how big of an impact do you think New Super Mario Brothers made on the 2D gaming scene? Like, would 2D gaming be where it is now without it? Would it have, obviously the 2D game would still have all of its older fans, but would it have attracted as many younger fans as we see now? That, would it still be there? Like, would Shovel Knight be as insanely popular among all ages? Uh, or would it have been dismissed because of its graphical style? I don't know. I still think some standouts would have been popular, but I genuinely wonder how much of an impact it would have had. Uh, you know what? I don't even want to bring up the music. I think this is a good way to leave off the episode. Like,
I mean, we did talk about the music a little bit with the enemies doing their little jumping and stuff in
yeah,
time to the music.
and the
The
wah
music
wah.
itself is it's not super loved in general, I
No,
think.
I like it,
Uh,
but it's not super
it's
loved at
fine. I don't
large.
mind it. I've never minded it. A lot of people really hate it, but you know what? I think it's fine. And that's probably all that
I
really needs to be said about it.
I will. The only other thing I wanted to say about it, and I'd actually love see if you agree with me on this. I feel like this game is where Mario music kind of turned, like made turned the page, if that makes sense. Because prior to this, like I feel like Sunshine and Super Mario 64 kind of have a similar feel to their, well, S- S- Sunshine has its own kind of, its own kind of soundtrack, but I feel like New Super Mario Brothers, it kind of set the aesthetic for music for a long while, with the exception of Mario Galaxy, which was full orchestral. Like, I feel like this kind of set the music for, like the new Super Mario Brothers games, obviously, but then also maybe the 3D World games, even at that.
Maybe a little. I mean, obviously the new Super Mario Brothers games, they all have a very similar soundscape,
They have a lot more
but
jazz, I noticed, with theirs. Like, it's very like big bandish almost.
yeah, the 3D games like I'm trying to blank on the composer's name, but the lead composer for Super Mario Galaxy has, continued to do the Super Mario 3D Land, Super Mario 3D World, obviously Galaxy 2 and Odyssey. Koji Kondo contributed to those, but I'm drawing a blank on his name. I think I can't remember what his name is. But
I'll look it up.
there was a story on, I believe it was an Iwata Asks, where he uh kind of went in with the wrong approach to Mario Galaxy, and I probably shouldn't be talking about Mario Galaxy when you're about to do an
Yeah,
episode on it,
that's going to be next
but
week's episode.
but uh I remember there was a story in the Iwata Asks about he sort of made these sort of cute and playful tunes and sent it to Koji Kondo, and he's like, "No, this is crap. Like Mario's not cute. Mario is cool." And that kind of reset his thinking about what the approach to music for Mario Galaxy should be. And I
Interesting.
think he has done an outstanding job of kind of making the new sound of 3D Mario, which, if I'm being honest, um Mario music is super iconic, but like,
Yeah.
I as iconic as it is though, like I don't know if I would still put it necessarily on like the same level of like a Final Fantasy or a Chrono Trigger or something like that. But the like Mario Galaxy onwards, like on the 3D game side, I absolutely would. I mean, that stuff is incredible. Whereas the
Yeah.
earlier Koji Kondo stuff, I mean, he knows how to make an earworm, but like I do kind of think the newer stuff is on a higher level, if I'm being honest. I love the
Uh,
NES and Super Nintendo music, but it's I don't know. I do gotta say I think some of the newer stuff is better.
After kind of talking this
But
out a
when I
little bit,
say
I think
newer, I don't mean new Super Mario Brothers, because
no, no.
the music in the I do like the castle music in the new games, but
Mhm.
outside of that, I'm pretty ambivalent about the soundtracks in the new games. They're fine. They don't bother me.
It's funny. I was the joke I was gonna do as like the tagline. I was gonna try to do some kind of joke on like I'm playing the new Super Mario Brothers game and kind of do like a who's on first type of joke. Like what do you mean the new Super? You mean Super Mario Bowser's Fury? He's like no, like new Super Mario Bros. Yeah, Super Mario Bowser's Fury. Stuff like that. But
New the word new is the worst thing that ever happened to Nintendo branding. I hate it.
oh my god, the new 3DS or whatever as well.
Yeah, I hope so much that the next Switch is not going to be new Nintendo Switch. They have to know that's a bad idea. I'm not convinced that they know that's a bad idea, but I just have to believe that some common sense exists there, and they will not call it new Nintendo Switch. Do
You
not
would
call it
hope.
new Nintendo Switch. Please do not.
But after their naming conventions of the last couple console generations, you have Nintendo DS, Nintendo 3DS, which is different. Nintendo DS and 3DS are different enough, but to a casual person, like that's way too confusing. That's almost as
Yes.
bad as Wii and Wii U. Well,
Yeah.
it's actually. And then you obviously have the new 3DS. So now you're confusing even more people. I bought a
And then
new
the new
3DS.
2DS.
Yeah.
You have the new Nintendo DS, new Nintendo 3DS, new Nintendo 3DS XL, new Nintendo 2DS XL. But there is no new Nintendo 2DS. There's just new
There's
Nintendo
just
2DS
oh
XL.
my gosh.
There's oh,
AVGN should do a chronologically confused about the naming scheme. I've been of the DS games. But no, what I was going to say was I think I've talked myself out of my the point I thought I had of this was the turning, this was them turning the page, and this kind of defined a lot of music for the next generation. I think I'm way off with that. Like now that I think about Mario Galaxy and how different like the 3D World and 3D Land game soundtrack are, and how different Odyssey soundtrack is, it's just it's not even anywhere close. It's the biggest, most defining characteristic of the new Super Mario Brothers soundtrack is the wah
yeah,
wah,
yeah. Wah, wah.
which
And again,
I
that
love,
did
but people
stick
hate.
through the new series, and of course it's in the Mario Maker games and stuff like that as well. Um but yeah, it did set the soundscape for the 2D games for sure.
Yes, for
Which
better or
is
worse.
for better or worse. I don't mind it. It's fine.
But all right, I think that is a good place to wrap it up. We've run the gamut with this episode. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I was worried for myself I wasn't going to have enough to say about this game, but I think we did a really good job at just kind of breaking down uh like a lot of stuff with it. Especially I listeners, I really hope you get you we've painted a good enough picture for you for what Mario was like when this came out. Like the if Try's personal story doesn't tell you what Mario fans were clamoring for, I don't know what will. So let's wrap up this episode of the Still Loading Podcast. Try, thank you so much for joining me. As per usual, where can the good people find you online, and what would you like to promote?
Yeah, I mean, I am on YouTube at youtube.com/slash my life in gaming. I run the channel with Corey Carlson, and we do whatever gaming content we want to do or have time for. We're kind of known for a lot of our sort of relatively simple, reviews of like more retro focused gaming tech, but sometimes newer stuff. And we stream every Sunday night, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I also stream every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Backloggery Twitch channel. So yeah, that's pretty much the extent of my internet presence these days. Do a lot of collaborations with Digital Foundry as well. Been starting to do some let's plays for Digital Foundry. We've been having fun with that.
And you've also been doing a lot of podcast crossovers with like me,
Yeah.
obviously, Retro Hangover. Lots of good stuff going out there. Yeah. So as usual for me, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com, which by the way, if you want to let us know your thoughts as to how much of an influence was New Super Mario Brothers for the future of the gaming landscape, whether it's specific to 2D or otherwise, feel free to write in. I'd really love to hear other people's thoughts. Or hit me up on social media as well, at any of the places I mentioned before, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. If you want to support the show, please give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more people find the show. It pleases the algorithm gods, and I hope that someday they will smile their warm light down up. Well, I shouldn't say it's the algorithm gods don't really have a warm light, but they're doing something up there behind the scenes there. So 5-star rating and review over there helps out. It helps with visibility. If you want to support the show monetarily, I got a bunch of cool stuff for you. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes a few days earlier at a higher bit rate, as well as access to a patron exclusive Discord. For $4 a month, you'll get everything at the $1 tier, plus 2 mini bonus episodes every single month, which has it's a variety of different topics. I do retro magazine reviews. I do music selections where I kind of play through a series of some of my favorite gaming music and kind of talk about it. I'm also playing through for these mini episodes one of those little handhelds that has 220 games on it, and all combined into one. And there's some high quality games on there. So if you want to hear me torture myself playing through those, that's all at the $4 level. And the last section is at the $5 level. You'll get everything at the $1 and $4 levels, plus access to Still Bonding, which is an exclusive podcast for Patreon where me and my friend Erica bond over 007. We are going through every single James Bond movie for better or worse, and it has been a wonderful ride. At the time this episode is coming out, On Her Majesty's Secret Service was released a week or two ago, and the episode that'll be out this month is Diamonds Are Forever. So yeah, that is everything over at Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But the most important shout out I have is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that is all I have for you this week. Thank you all so much for listening. Mario Month is here. I will see you all next week for a new episode of Mario Month. Try, thank you very much for joining me.
Glad to be here. Always fun.
And I will see you all next time.